Artificial intelligence is remaking marketing as we speak, and if you're a marketer, you can either get up to speed or get left behind. The choice is yours, and really, it's a no-brainer. Join Geoff Livingston and Greg Verdino as they explore the latest AI news, trends, tools, and ideas that are creating the future of marketing today. This is No Brainer, an AI podcast for marketers. Oh, and just in case you're wondering, yes, I am an AI. Take it away, Geoff and Greg.
Hey, this is Greg Verdino. You are tuned into No Brainer. I'm here with Geoff Livingston. How are you today, Geoff?
What's up, my man? We had an extra week off because of the 4th, so I'm fresh and ready to go.
I know, I missed you. I feel like it's been a busy few weeks, but it's definitely different to take an extra week off, maybe chill from the podcast a little, get our thoughts together, and of course, most importantly, join Threads like everybody else.
It's amazing how many people are just like, I'm so sick of talking about AI. Let's talk about Threads. But I think we got our eye on the ball here. That's a distraction for me.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to wind the clock back to 2007, start posting pictures of our lunch and asking what's the ROI of putting our pants on. I think that time has well and truly passed.
I have a concept for you. It's called the 4-hour work week. I was talking about it on Threads.
That is a blast from the past. That is a blast from the past.
Burn, baby. Hollywood burn. I don't hear anybody talking about 4-hour work weeks anymore.
Not at all. I think you're lucky to get a 40-hour work week. And if we buy into the productivity boost we're going to get from AI, I think some people are like, oh, it's going to be the 20-hour work week. It's like, nope, it's going to be the 60-hour work week.
It's going to be the 250% yield work week.
Because obviously there's lots of ways that AI can, in fact, be applied to all the different things we do in our jobs every day. And that kind of brings us to what we're talking about this week in a way, right? How's that for a segue?
Do tell.
So today we've got an interesting episode. Last time you were with us, we went deep into tools, really, and we kind of got deep into technologies and sort of applications and the way these tools could be used. In that case, it was specifically video tools. Here we're kind of pulling it back out, right? We want to talk about the idea of the use case and really devote this episode to defining what it really means, right? What is a use case? How does a marketer develop the right use cases for their business? And how do you actually ensure that you're gaining the kind of strategic advantage your business could and should gain from the application of AI, and not just fiddling around with all of these sort of little tactical tools. So I think we're going to have a great conversation. Geoff, I'm going to hand it over to you in probably 30 seconds to kick us off. I don't know why, just for people watching, I just did like a peace sign. Like I'm going to kick you like I'm doing like 2 and 2, like we're the dating
we
game.
piss you off. Peace.
But since you're not pissed off yet, also for anybody listening or watching, I'd love to remind you all that we are available, of course, if you're listening to us on all of your favorite pod services. And if you are listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or anyplace else, please be sure to rate the show, to provide a review, and of course, to share it with anybody you believe might be interested in the content that we produce every couple of weeks. And we hope that our perspective adds to the conversation and helps people think these things through. So with that, Geoff, I want to hand it over to you and see if we can maybe start to level set around the idea of the use case and why this is so important, not just for AI, but certainly for any marketing technology. But as it relates to our topic, of course, AI in the marketing workspace.
Yeah. And I think it's a great topic, and I think it's really timely because I'm seeing a lot of conversations happen about AI generally right now, which are kind of confusing. And then in addition to that, I see a lot of marketing speak coming out from vendors, which is kind of adding to the confusion, right? And, marketers love being marketed too. I do. And I love a great ad campaign, and I'm a sucker. And, like right now, it's while we're recording this, it's, it'll probably still be when we release it. It's Amazon Prime Day, right? And I'm just like, I got a little advertisement from Yeti I love Yeti mugs. I take them on my dog walk. I'm like, I love Yeti. I love their marketing. I even have a sticker on the back of this PC, a Yeti sticker. That's how much of a marketer I am. Marketers love being marketed to. So it makes sense to me that a lot of this information is kind of getting regurgitated out there. But first of all, let's start with the level set about AI. AI is not ChatGPT. ChatGPT is a form of AI, but AI has been around a long time. And we've talked about this many, many times. And I think it's important because the word use case comes out of that larger data science AI profession, right? And I think you and I were talking a little bit beforehand. What's happened with marketing is that, we've kind of convoluted that statement. But first of all, I'll just say when I'm speaking with CMOs, when I'm talking with marketers, they just use ChatGPT as AI. And maybe there's this stable diffusion thing or this mid-journey thing or whatever. Oh my God, like ChatGPT is going to do all these graphics now, and it doesn't really jive well. And it just shows that the market's really maybe not educated yet,
Right.
in a true sense beyond what they've read in the media.
Yeah.
Would you agree with
Right.
that?
I would agree with that. And it's, to your point about marketing and marketers loving marketing, but really marketing in general, I'm trying to think of how to say this, that, it very well may be a matter of, he who speaks the loudest, right?
Yeah,
It's always right. Coca-Cola better than RC Cola, right? And, you might almost think if you were of a certain mind that if it's a hamburger, it must be McDonald's, right? Because if you've got the marketing muscle behind your brand, you're able to make your brand in a lot of ways synonymous with its category, which is something that
perfect.
OpenAI has been very successful in doing, right? Certainly even more so with some marketing, some Microsoft money behind them, right?
Totally right.
So,
We
certainly
know they own the New York Times.
you can't deny, right, that on whatever the date was, November 30th, right, that was a galvanizing moment, right? There's like a before ChatGPT, after ChatGPT sort of
Correct.
sea change.
Like
But
a
I think,
Netscape moment.
right, but I think that, a lot of people have gotten stuck at that moment in time. And I read an article earlier today, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal, about this tension that exists in organizations where the end users, the worker bees in an organization, want to pilot, test, play, experiment with these generative AI tools. And of course, many large organizations are putting policies in place, even so far as restricting or prohibiting use of these tools because of security issues, lack of policy, whatever. Right. And the whole article was framed as, you know, Justin, the worker, wants to use ChatGPT, not wants to use
Right.
generative AI, but wants to use ChatGPT, and his boss says no, basically. Right. So there is this sort of reduction of the vast, very rich space of even just generative AI down to a single vendor. Right. And then, I think that once that vendor defines or shapes your perception of the universe we're playing in, all of a sudden that vendor's use cases become your de facto usage, right?
Right.
It's backwards, right?
It's totally backwards. And the reality is that to use a Hollywood metaphor, the tail's wagging the dog.
Right.
And it's kind of a big mistake for brands to just, or marketing organizations to just accept what they're being told or what they're reading, that that's the use case. In fact, really mature, and I think it's a maturity thing, right? Mature AI organizations build use cases internally based off of business problems. Like it's not a use, it's a use case, a use business case. And they literally understand or believe that they understand, pardon me, they literally understand that the resources that they're going to have to play, the risks, uh, costs associated with it, potential benefits, impacts. They even outline change management in some cases when you're dealing with a larger issue. For example, like, changing the way your entire proofing structure works for documents using Grammarly Go. If you decided to do an enterprise license, that would be something that requires change management, right?
Of
I mean,
course.
it may be a very quick 2-week use case of change management, but you would still want to have that plan just so you communicate and set expectations and educate people. And that's true of larger companies. Larger companies tend to be more mature with AI. The reality is most of the Fortune 500, if not all of them, already have somewhat to fully mature, relatively speaking, AI organizations. It's the rest of the business world that's like, oh my God, now these prosumer apps have made AI available to me and they're all marketing use cases to me. And, you and I have seen several journalists talk about these use cases. We've seen analysts parroting these vendor use cases, right? We've seen even other marketers talk about these use cases, but they're not use cases. They're like, here's a use case. I wrote a blog with Jasper, like you were talking about earlier today. Or I used Midjourney for a blog image. It's incredible. Best use case ever. And it's like, okay, is that a use? Yeah, for sure. And probably valuable to you. But did you quantify it? Did you understand how much time it saved you, how much money it saved you? What kind of process have you put in place to make it replicable? Have you implemented across your organization? Or are you just a solopreneur that's one-off screwing around with tools and seeing what works and doesn't work? And so I think what we're really seeing is that, to make a long, convoluted answer come down to a crystallization, uses being discussed as use cases when in actuality, there's no real strategic business thinking around it.
Yeah. Yep. Why don't we, just to be clear, right? Because there might be some people listening who intuitively get what we're talking about here, but maybe aren't quite clued in on the distinction we're trying to make. And I shared an example earlier that had nothing to do with AI. And maybe, that'll help kind of frame this a little bit around kind of what is the difference between a use or a tactical use versus an actual strategic use case. And then maybe we could talk about, in relation to AI specifically, what do we put on one side versus the other, right? So the example that I was talking about earlier before we started recording was, you hear a lot of marketers say, we want to rank for certain keywords in search, right? And they'll say, well, and they might think, oh, that's my use case or that's my objective. And it's neither, right? That's a tactic you use to meet an objective, which probably sounds something more like, I want to be my audience's first choice for information about a topic of X, right? And there's a lot of ways to achieve that have nothing to do with search, right? But of course, search might be a piece of that, and then ranking for certain keywords will be a tactic you use to be more visible to that audience when they're looking for information. So
Sure.
I think marketers have a history of confusing objectives,
Shiny object syndrome, anybody?
or strategies and tactics. And I think we're seeing that come to light here, but because these tools are so readily available, they're consumer grade in the best possible way, meaning anybody can just pick them up and run with them. They're not expensive. They're typically not hard to use, right? This is the first time we've had access to AI tools that didn't require some like scary expertise in data science and right. Like anybody, a dumb old marketer like me can start using fingers on the keys, directly interacting with an artificial intelligence system. It doesn't require programming expertise, doesn't require a data science degree, right? So what happens is, and, as you're talking about consultants and analysts and associations and all these groups that are publishing opinions or white papers or ebooks or playbooks about Gen AI in particular now, when they start to rattle off the use cases, it becomes a laundry list of tactics. Write
Totally.
a post, edit a post, do some research, version a post,
Even the
translate a
analyst
post.
report, like that
Right.
McKinsey report. Let's use somebody that could take
Sure.
the hit, right?
Right.
Like McKinsey's report just had like, oh, here are these possible uses. Harvard Business Review article I read. here are these crazy innovations we could do because I use Midjourney like this.
Right.
It's just,
Yeah.
it's not just the most bottom of all people, that are doing
No,
this,
right.
people
Yeah.
that are like right out of grade school or whatever. I mean, we're talking premier brands are acting this way. There's almost this pack mentality that's occurred, this
Yeah.
kind of rush to address AI
Yeah.
in this tactical way.
Yeah. And, there's absolutely, in my opinion, there's absolutely a place for that kind of stuff, but it lives at the sort of the front end of a maturity curve, the very front end, right? Where
Yeah.
there's an awareness that these tools are available. And we, in fact, encourage this in our last episode. If you're a marketer, play with these tools, but the
Totally right.
operative word is play.
But we also broke into some like general use case buckets for video. Like here's pre-production. Here's where we can
Right.
save some time.
Sure.
Here's production where you can save some time. Here's where you can edit in the editing process, save some time. And the reason why I'm bringing up saving time in particular is one of the things that AI is really good at is eliminating rote tasks. That's one of the number one things it does.
Right.
Is it makes you more productive and allows you to do more. And that's where the cost savings come in. And that's a
Right.
legitimate business outcome.
Right.
But it requires intent, repetition, and process, right? You have to do it over and over and over and over again. And to build in the processes so you get the quality of result that you need, as opposed to getting a crappy blog that Jasper wrote that I had to edit for 2 hours. And that was an interesting use case. That's not a use case. The use
Right.
case is that process, that ability to suddenly make yourself 50% more productive regularly over and over again, and then banking that savings.
Right. What I'm hearing there, and I think we're going to get deeper into this through the episode, is starting with the outcome you're looking to achieve, right?
Yeah.
And I don't mean the output you're looking to achieve, right? The blog post is the output. The list of search terms is the output. The buyer persona is the output, right? That's different from the outcome, right? So when you talk about using a generative AI tool or any AI, but in this case, let's say generative AI to improve productivity, what you're looking to achieve as an outcome isn't more blog content necessarily, but it
It's
might
time
be
savings.
right.
Yeah.
It might be cost savings. It might be greater workforce efficiency. It might be
Right.
doing more with less. I've got a small team that can only do so much. And when the rote tasks take their day away from them, they are by definition still kind of falling, the strategic tasks all by the wayside, right?
Right.
It's getting rid of that tension in the workday, right? Any of these might be legitimate outcomes an organization wants to achieve, all based on a sort of efficiency, effectiveness, and productivity, which is just one area to apply this technology. But that's very different from coming into it from the perspective of use this to write a post, right? Use this
Totally.
to automate your rote tasks or to improve your productivity by 25% is very different, right?
Here's an example. Like another way to look at it too is, let's use some of our podcast tools that we use. Midjourney, right? And I'm the guy that does the Midjourney images. So if you hate it, blame me. But yeah, the reality is like, I probably use Midjourney about 5-6 times a month for imagery that I can use in my posts. And of course I don't own the copyright. We all know that with fair use and the current interpretation of that law. But what that does do is it saves me about $60 a month in licensing. And as a bootstrap startup, right? I mean, that $1,000, okay? That's money that my kid can wear to school this fall. And to me, that's important, right? At this stage in my company. Now, maybe later on, I'll have a more generous license. That doesn't mean I don't license images. I'm licensing images for my website, but I need to manage that cost. So that is a direct business use case and one that is repeated over and over intentionally. And I've got it down to roughly the same amount of time it takes me to search for an image using a stock photography site. So that's, the trade-off there. It's the same time, I save the cost. Memento is what we use to edit our video clips, right? And I think that probably saves us combined between the two of us anywhere between 4 to 5 hours an episode. I mean, if you think about what it takes to cut, get all the text in there, transcripts, the 9 yards, I mean, it's a big sloppy task. And I don't think either of us may feel like that it's worth it to do a lot of it. But what Memento allows us to do is make that task scalable, usable, and realistic, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I mean, if you think about
the campaign,
right, and if you think about that as a specific example, it's almost non-negotiable today for if you're creating long form content like this podcast, it's almost non-negotiable that you need to create short form derivative content. But there is nothing more mind numbing and rote and repeatable than and time consuming, frankly, than the idea of going through an hour long episode or a 45-minute episode, picking out the 1-minute clip, right? And it's something that, your 4 or 5 hours of doing that, or my 4 or 5 hours doing something like that, could be better spent on so many other things, right? That cannot be automated, right? So, so there you
but
end
to your
up
point about the reach, right? Like we get 10 times the reach on those short clips. So, I mean, it's crazy. And I think what we just illustrated with us is actually the classic creator's dilemma, where they love creating shit and then they want to run away.
Right.
And what AI lets people like us do is actually do all that extension work. Like, hey, I wrote this really smart strategic brief, but I really don't want to write the press release or the blog post or the email campaign or the landing page or the social media for it. Well, now I could just go to Jasper and do that over and over again. And what takes me 10 hours now takes me 3 hours, and I could do that on a repeated basis. And your boss loves that because you're 250% more productive on a repeatable basis. Right. And by the way, you're increasing your leads by 200%, maybe not as good because you're using AI, but still pretty damn good, right? Any CMO is going to look at that and say, okay, I'm getting 200% the amount of leads. Okay. And I get a 250% productivity increase. Yeah. That's a use case I want to use across my entire organization.
Right. And
how do we do it?
I think, right. And I think the distinction here, I feel like I just want to put a fine point on it. Because we tend to, we talk, we ramble, we go all around, we approach from every angle. We tell what we're talking
to us
is when we describe that use again, that example using Memento, it isn't a matter, it was never a matter of, hey, there's this cool tool Memento I'm hearing about. Let's find something to do with it, right? It's not about a solution looking for a problem. It's, we don't have the time between our day jobs and everything else we do, family, whatever, whatnot. We don't have the time to actually sit down and produce derivative short form assets. Which tools are best suited to that task? The problem that we're seeing in the marketplace today is that you hear about a tool, whether it's ChatGPT, that's your first exposure to generative AI, or you see LinkedIn ads or Facebook ads or whatever for Jasper. And we're not picking on Jasper or ChatGPT.
We're just the popular tools, right?
But you see the ads for that tool, or you hear people talking about Midjourney, and you have this sort of like this moment where you're like, ooh, what could I do with that? Right. And the way that tool has been marketed to you with its laundry list of use it for this, use it for this, use it for this, use it for this, becomes your sort of, I don't know, poor man's take on what an AI strategy should be, right? So you're being entirely driven and directed by the technology vendors to create or to make a set of assumptions about the best applications of those tools for your business. And that's exactly opposite of the way you should be approaching these things.
You've drank the Kool-Aid, and, I know that's a horrible metaphor, but in many ways from a marketing standpoint, you have drank the Kool-Aid. You really have. I mean, you're letting the tail wag the dog.
Absolutely.
And I think, anytime you have vendors or technology platforms that are like looking for uses. You know what I mean? Where somebody creates something which they think is really cool, and now they're just trying to like slap a whole bunch of uses on it to sell it.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got a problem because as a technology vendor, you've created something that's basically, gold plated in a lot of ways. It doesn't really have a lot of value. Right. And so I think another unsaid thing that I'm seeing with this, you and I have discussed it here, but generally the larger marketplace, there are too many. There are too many people trying to sell $50 subscriptions and $40 subscriptions. And there's always so much that's going to happen before that there's a collapse at some point where we see consolidation. It's just, there's just way too many platforms out there where people are like, AI, I've got it. Now buy it. Oh, that doesn't work for what you're trying to do. Well, how about this use case? How about this use case? How about that? And I think I'm really starting to see that happen a lot now with some of these brands. I mean, it's desperation and it's a lack of positioning and really, quite frankly, a lack of product marketing.
Yeah, absolutely. Why don't we take a quick break to hear from, if anybody's watching, please read that for yourself. No, let's take a quick break, hear from one of our sponsors, and let's come back and try to break this down a little more.
Cool. All right. Support for the No Brainer podcast and all the shows on the Marketing Podcast Network is provided by Active Campaign. With Active Campaign, you can create and send email campaigns, manage your leads and customers, create landing pages, set up automated workflows, and track your results all in one approachable platform. It's no wonder Active Campaign has over 185,000 happy customers around the globe, such as Preview Me. They're a B2B software company, Greg, and they use Active Campaign to send their prospective customers highly visual and personalized emails as they progress through CRM stages, such as completing a demo. This has increased their click-through rates by 96%. For a limited time, Active Campaign is offering No Brainer listeners a chance to double your contacts for free when you sign up at activecampaign.com/activate. That means if your email list has 10,000 contacts, you only need to pay for 5,000. Or you can pay for the 10,000 and get an extra 10,000 contacts totally free. Go to activecampaign.com/activate to sign up today. That's activecampaign.com/activate. Terms and conditions apply. Back to you, my man.
All right. That's a good deal, my friend. Hopefully some of our listeners will take advantage of that. So let's talk a bit about, we did talk a little bit about sort of the dangers of, I think, buying into the sort of the technology hype cycle too much, the sort of the unfortunate current state of sort of analysis and consultancy and punditry around the
and we should say we're pundits too, really. I
We're-
mean, like,
absolutely.
right.
And
I think we own that we just don't know. We're like maybe 3 weeks ahead of everybody. Maybe.
And and I've been guilty of the same thing too, both in terms of seeing a tool, thinking it looked cool and going, ooh, I can use that to help me write. Or, even sometimes when somebody says, well, what do you use this stuff for? And sometimes my gut even is to go, well, you could do this and you could do this and you could do this, right? But I think, what we're saying here is that that's a perfectly logical, obvious, and in some ways productive place to start when
Totally
you're
right.
first wrapping your hands and your head around the opportunities that generative AI may create for your marketing organization. But you need to pretty quickly move beyond that sort of exploratory stage and really get into proper piloting and experimentation. And this is where it becomes important to understand the kind of distinction we're trying to make and to really define a use case. So, we already, kind of implied that the application of a technology is not the same thing as the use case to which you apply that technology. We talked about the difference or the distinction between sort of the output or the use and the actual use case, which should be more strategic. And when
Right.
when and I said this earlier, and I think, here's where we'll maybe get a bit deeper into it. For me, it always starts with understanding what it is you're looking to achieve, right? We talked about, that might be, are you looking to drive efficiency or productivity, right, in your organization, which is a common sort of, whether that's a cost saving measure or a money making measure, it could be either. But that is a common application of generative AI because we understand that it can automate or at least accelerate routine tasks. Or you might be looking to address a pain point, right? Where it could be an internal pain point. I have one content marketer. How do I keep pace with my audience's information needs, right? Or it could be a customer pain point. We only offer business day customer service, right? And we can't afford to staff 24/7. And we are going to use chatbots to fill in around the, 9 to 5 hours, right? And of course it can be, you're looking to modernize or innovate. How do we personalize marketing at every touch point that we have with every consumer in our customer base, right? Those are like legitimate, in my mind, categories of use case that can be solved in a range of different ways, with AI in general or generative AI specifically being a way to solve. And there may be other ways, right? But I think that's where, you kind of make the distinction between, I want a chatbot versus I want to deliver better, faster, round the clock customer service, right? That's a use versus a use case, right? What are some of the things you're thinking about?
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's always like, do I have a major business problem that I can resolve? For example, when I think of a marketing organization, a lot of them, our side of the house, we have two types of content we usually end up creating. One is the very public one, which we like a little more usually as creatives, the one where we're out there creating these campaigns. But the other one is sales enablement, right? And that's usually the more valuable one for an enterprise. So how can I use AI to better enable my sales force, for example, and maybe my SDRs, and even my client execs, right? And so like one way to do that, let's say you have a very strong content marketing organization. Anybody that's been in a larger enterprise that's, got several hundred people working there, I think we've all been there as content marketers where it's like, you have the sales guy showing up, or like now, I guess in the post-pandemic era, like DMing you on Teams and being like, do we have this piece on this article? And you're like, want to throw your head into a wall because you wrote 5 pieces like that in the past 6 months, which clearly the asshole did not see on LinkedIn, or that you didn't read your emails or anything like that. That's never happened to me. Just kidding. But you know what I mean? Like we all been there. And the reality is that that's nature. That's human nature, right? I don't pay attention to most of the stuff I see in my stream. There's nothing more embarrassing than when somebody comes up to me, well, you didn't see my Facebook update. Right. I don't read Facebook anymore. You didn't see my Threads update. What's Threads? That whole 9 yards. I mean, like we don't see every communication that comes out from every single human being on earth. And particularly within an enterprise, which tend to want to make you work more than you want to work. You may be selective about what you consume. So with that in mind, let's say you build a GPT implementation that's private. And this is something that, we're actively doing right now, but it's private, right? And all of a sudden you can put all your content in there and train it. And then because it's a private implementation, you can also perhaps tweak the algorithm. It also sources the document that it's summarizing. Now, all of a sudden your SDR can ask you that question. You could say, well, ask the GPT engine. And then it pulls up the document that's most relevant to them, gives them a summarization of it. Hopefully you've trained them as part of your use case to check that summarization against the document, and they can share that with their customer. And that now they have a tool that's much more useful to them, that doesn't require them to go on a goose chase. It's much more useful to the marketing organization because they could just train the GPT every time they publish something new. And even client executives can use it to research information before they talk to a customer, for that big pitch or that big meeting. And to me, that's a huge sales enablement and productivity increase where you're making your content go a lot further and it's something you can probably measure on conversion rates. So that
Yeah.
to me is like a business problem that's resolved by an AI, as opposed to, oh shit, we got GPT. Should we get Pro?
Right.
Right.
Right. Absolutely. And I think that also gets you out of the problem I was talking about earlier in from that Wall Street Journal article of the employee wanting to use ChatGPT or pick your poison, and the organization saying effectively, we don't understand this well enough. We don't know how to put guardrails on it. We can't govern it. We can't put it through a process. Therefore, we're going to draw a red line and say you cannot use these tools, or you can only use these tools in these very limited, restricted ways, right? If
the vendor has told you can use that tool for, as a consumer.
Right. As you come at it from the perspective of, a leader thinking about the business problems they need to solve, and then applying a tool in a way that addresses the problem, you can then take a more strategic, more structured, more considered approach to how that tool gets implemented into your organization. Right. And that's, I think, where, especially when you think about larger organizations, where there is less, I would say, tolerance for sort of shadow IT and these like skunk work things that are happening where one man in the marketing department is using a random tool she brought herself, right?
Or worse, set up her own Azure account and built one.
I wouldn't count on too many marketers to do that on their own, but certainly I would expect many marketers to be using ChatGPT. I think I used an example, and you and I were talking about this yesterday.
Don't underestimate those developers, brother, man. Those web developers are tricky.
Web developers for sure.
Oh yeah.
But brand managers, not necessarily. And, like I was telling you yesterday, Geoff, and I'm not going to name names or shame anybody. I'm not going to do that, but I was watching a webinar where a guy who actually I used to work with years and years ago, is a senior executive at an agency. And he's got a couple of people on his teams pumping client campaign data into the public version of ChatGPT and asking ChatGPT to summarize that data and surface the patterns and insight, right? So you end up with these, any IT director worth their weight in salt, let alone gold, hears about that would have a heart attack, right? You do need to, as a marketing leader, you need to be thinking about who in my organization do I need to involve in a decision-making process around what tools we use and how we use them, right? It's not just by Jasper, and there's nothing wrong with Jasper. And they've got guardrails built in, and there's lots of great functionality and features and templates and really valuable stuff. But if your marketing use case is that we want to improve our content marketing throughput by X%, and you believe Jasper or Writer or Copy AI or whatever is the right tool, right? You've got to now have a conversation, right, with your technology team, maybe with your data science team, certainly with other people across the organization. You need to build a coalition of people who are going to look at, okay, this is your use case. These are the available technologies. Let's figure out what best meets your needs and make a strategic decision, right? You're not just picking a vendor, you're picking a strategic partner in a lot of ways.
Also too, once you get locked into that cost, right? Like that's the thing that IT really wants to look at beyond the security implications, and they will look at the security implications.
Sure.
But they don't want to see Microsoft get another $50,000 onto their contract because suddenly everybody's using their version of GPT or whatever it is, right? So, or they don't want to see OpenAI get that massive license, or Grammarly go. I mean, their seat license for each person in an enterprise gets to be pricey,
Right. Gets to be pretty pricey. So, and then you also have, sort of that sort of technical debt over time that if you've made the wrong choice and you're stuck with a platform that maybe stops innovating over the course of their roadmap, or kind of loses ground, is no longer the hot technology, or
WebEx.
runs out of money, goes out of business, right? There's all sorts of things that can happen in this space, to your point, where there's 300 companies all doing the same thing with their own little tweak on it. You need to be smart and strategic, and you don't want 70 tools at play. You might want 7, right?
No.
And you don't need, you could, the things like, for example, you spoke about Memento, and and on our prior episode, we talked also about the fact that we use Descript, right? And Descript does a whole bunch of things, from using AI to transcribe, using AI to clean audio, allowing us to edit using transcription, allowing us to, although we've not done this yet, clone our voices and do kind of change voiceover if we need to. We're not that slick and polished, so I guess it doesn't make a difference. We're real, baby. But
Simmons hasn't called us yet for the ringer to come on yet, but maybe soon. Maybe soon.
Maybe. But we, but there, like, you got a single tool that does 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 things more than we're using it for. Where if you were just listening to marketplace noise, you might pick 7 different tools. Now you've got 7 tools to deal with, right?
Well, and that's the other thing too, is like, if you think about most enterprise IT architecture now, it's microservices based, so that everything integrates together. So we were using these different writing examples. And if you think about most enterprises have Microsoft as their Office suite. Some have Google, right?
Yeah.
But Grammarly integrates into Microsoft Word. So that makes it a lot more attractive, even though its generative writing capabilities are a lot more limited than the other players. But if we're just trying to get people to improve the copy of their writing, just write down your thoughts, and then Grammarly will suggest some ideas. That's good enough for you.
Yeah.
That might be true for 90%, 98% of the enterprise outside of marketing. And then we all know that marketing's got its own little tech stack usually. And maybe that's the group that gets Jasper, but you're not going to do that for everybody.
Right.
I mean, especially again, with that type of architecture mindset where, to your point, I don't want 70 different apps. I want one tech stack that's all residing within Microsoft that I could pick and choose which apps go into it and which ones leave.
Right. Yeah. And that's where, certainly, I know we use Writer here as our primary AI writing system. And, we've played with Jasper.
Really? Why? Tell us. I know. We don't want to get into this. But these guys might sponsor a show. Oh, let's get into it. Come on.
So, but we use Writer here, right? And, part of there is a standalone writing app like you would get in a ChatGPT, have a conversation with the AI and say, I want to write a blog post about this. It'll write or outline this or give me 3 headlines or whatever. So it has that sort of chat-based functionality that I can do in a dedicated sort of application style interface. But it also plugs into Google Docs. It plugs into Office 365. It plugs into any place else we might be writing, the same way, say, Grammarly Go does, so that I can write in, if I prefer writing in a Google Doc, I'm still getting a lot of the same functionality in that Google Doc, right? That's important, right? That integration is key, which is also why, as we've discussed a number of other times, when you look at players like a HubSpot, like a Salesforce, like an Adobe, like, right? There's others out there who have an experience cloud, a marketing cloud, or whatever you want to call it, right? And they are now integrating AI natively into their applications or into their cloud overall. You now have a whole different conversation going on because these tools are just being embedded into the tools you use every day. And, I think the other thing we're seeing is that these companies that are, they have scale, that have experience, that super serve in a lot of ways the markets that they support, are approaching this from a more use case oriented perspective right out of the gate. They're like, HubSpot is saying, what is the pain point for the sales rep? And how do we solve that using generative AI? Salesforce is saying, what is the pain point for the sales rep? And how do we solve that using generative AI? And at the end of the day, it comes down to salespeople don't like to write, don't want to write, can't write, are too lazy to write,
Often.
whatever it is, right? So therefore they
Or-
shortcut
right.
it, right? How do we
And they have
give
to
them the
do
tools?
research.
Right. Right. How do we give
Good
them the
salespeople
tools
do that.
to research their prospects easier and to create targeted, effective outreach to those prospects? Right. And that's how they come at it. And the answer happens to be generative AI. Right. But,
Right.
it
But generative AI trained in a certain use case. So like
exactly trained on a certain use case.
ChatSpot, which is what you're referring to, ChatSpot AI, the HubSpot alpha sandbox for generative AI. I mean, you and I both looked at that on a private call when we were chatting. And I mean, that's amazing, right? They've got all these prompts built into their GPT implementation to help the SDR, to help the sales executive, the client executive, literally research, to craft that email, to better understand their prospect. Me, that is like a really smart niche tool. And you can see that even though HubSpot's been very reserved about the way they've integrated generative AI into their actual CRM content vehicles, that they're thinking about this in a way that's going to be pretty impactful, I think, for the sales organization.
Yeah. I feel like we're both kind of jonesing to share some specific examples of what marketers are doing and the kinds of use cases they're putting on the table.
So let's start with this first one. You and I just pulled down a couple off the internet that we kind of liked. One was Cyber Incorporated. They use Synthesia, which you and I are both familiar with. It's a video AI platform. We actually talked about it last week. Cyber Inc. wanted to scale content creation, expand global reach by creating videos in multiple languages, which is something that, as marketers, we all tend to eventually hit that translation road where we have to get stuff into a different country or to a different user base within our own country. So that can be really expensive. An ad agency, so they use Synthesia to do that. I think that's a pretty smart AI usage. What do you think about that?
That is a smart use case. I don't know if it was Omnicom or WPP, and I think I've spoken about this before, effectively did the very same thing when they did it when COVID hit and they were used to sending trainers out from office to office and, kind of do all of that kind of old school lunch and learn kind of training in person. Obviously that wasn't possible when COVID hit and flights weren't going and it wasn't safe to travel, and they did the same exact thing. Also, I believe use Synthesia, the same exact technology, and use that to create learning programs that they could deliver virtually, of course, and to deliver in multiple languages. And, some of it was corporate communication stuff, like our office will be open on Tuesday, but not Wednesday at a half capacity. And, here's how you book your desk. Right. And delivering it in Portuguese for the Brazilian office, for example. And some of it was training that, an agency might do on a new technology or process or whatever. Right. So I think that's a phenomenal use case, right? Where you have a need that can't be met through a more traditional means. Either it's not possible at all, as in the case of COVID, or it's not feasible in the case that the example of Cyber Inc., where it probably would have been cost prohibitive, too time consuming, and, probably would have fallen off of the to-do list, right? Gotten backburnered to the detriment of the organization and its customers.
It'd save them immense amount of money too. And if you think about the speed, it probably does it in as well. It probably allows the company to roll out a lot faster. Let's go on to our next one. An ad agency was working with Volkswagen. Can I have that business, please? Please. Anyway, Volkswagen was giving the agency was giving Volkswagen personal interpretations about ad buying decision. And the marketers at Volkswagen decided to rely wholly on data for which they decided to trust an AI so they can invest less in campaigns and upsurge their sales. Okay. So this is where I think agencies start to really kind of quiver a little bit, but I do think it is a common use case. The results, better forecasting of buying decisions. So they reduce human error, Volkswagen was able to cut the hidden costs the media agency had been charging. And not only this, there was an increase in sales by 20% for Volkswagen dealerships. I'd like to comment a little bit on this, in spite of my little tongue-in-cheek tongue wagging. I mean, obviously, this is the way business has been done for the last, 100 years. And that's just advertising. So what AI has done, though, is it's allowed the customer to know exactly how its marketing is working and how its advertising is working. And we know the more precise you are about your data, the more specific you could be about what ads work.
Sure. And that sounds to me like that's a traditional predictive AI application, right? That's
totally right. That's predictive analytics.
Generative AI. Clearly, now you
play for a good 10 years now.
Right. It's been in play for a long time. And, there's still obviously benefit to having a proper data analyst looking at the outputs of an AI system and making sure that the recommendations you're getting are accurate, and make sure there is a human being accountable for the decisions that are being made. But it makes the process so much more efficient.
And for the agency, though, I think the real lesson is, are you using AI copilots? Because if you're not, this is going to happen to you. And I think that's now true for every agency, right? Over the next 2 years, if you haven't integrated AI into your processes, you're going to be outcompeted by people that have, or that you're going to be insourced effectively. And so I think that the agency market, what this particular segment has already gone through, the advertising side, the digital advertising side, is now facing, the entire market is. Do you think that's fair, or do you think that's probably a little bit doomsaying?
I mean, it's probably doomsaying, but I don't think it's unfair. Right? Something, I don't think it's not existential risk, in the way we've spoken out against a couple of times.
Right. Like agencies are going to go away.
I think
it'll be the AI empowered agencies.
Right. I think the vast majority of agencies are going to need to be AI empowered or AI enabled, whatever you want to, however you want to talk. And that's true of the internal marketing departments too, right? Marketing departments roles are going to be redefined. The work of an agency, the work of a marketer will be reimagined. Which doesn't mean we want to, whether you're client side or agency side, you don't want to become overly reliant upon any technology, right? You can't be in a position where you're essentially abdicating all accountability, responsibility, authority, agency, lowercase a, to a tool, especially when the tool is largely a black box, right? But you do need to understand, how is this going to kind of reshape your role as a human marketer? How is this going to change your process? How will this restructure your team? What will the humans continue to do? What is it better for machines to do? Right. And there are going to be some lines you're going to need to draw and make some smart decisions, as we've spoken about in other episodes. And I fundamentally believe to be true, like there is still going to be a place for the wicked smart analyst or strategist. There will still be a place for the sort of stand apart creative. But even in those cases, understanding how to supercharge your own capabilities using technology, it will only become more important over the coming years.
Right. I agree with that. Okay. Let's talk about Coke. Since Coke, I like this particular group of case studies, if you would, because I think that usually when you have one really smart strategic success, it empowers more investment into AI. Coca-Cola worked with a data analytics firm to create an AI system that would analyze sales data and identify patterns in customer preferences. Using this data, the system was able to recommend specific product packaging and distribution strategies for different markets and demographics. Coke improved sales and distribution efficiencies by up to 30%. So obviously there are some significant cost savings and more profit, right? Then the company decided to tailor its marketing. And I think you and I maybe even grazed this case study on the back end through a GPT earlier this year. And its efforts were more effective using data-driven insights to deliver more targeted campaigns. In addition to its work on product packaging and distribution, Coke developed a virtual assistant that can help customers find products they're looking for and answer common questions. The virtual assistant is available on the company's website, mobile app, and uses NLP, natural language processing, to understand customer inquiries and respond appropriately. By embracing AI in its marketing efforts, Coke has been able to stay ahead of the competition and drive significant business.
Yeah. I mean, I think the specific examples aside, and they're all good examples, I think what comes across for me is, the fact that, and I don't know if these are in chronological order or not, but clearly the idea that the company identified a place to apply artificial intelligence to deliver a win of some kind, a specific outcome that was measurable, right? So they went into this clearly with an objective. They had a goal. They had some sort of performance metric they were looking to hit. They applied artificial intelligence as a means of improving performance. When it improved performance, it created appetite in the organization, I would assume, for additional programs, additional pilots, for scaling pilots, and so on and so forth. You don't get that kind of snowball effect when you start with a very specific tactical application, right? Sure. Could you say I've got one writer using an AI writing system to create more blog posts? And now if I give it to 2 writers, I'll create even more blog posts. And I give it to 3 writers, I'll create even more blog posts, right? Could you do that? Yes. Is there any sign that that's going to actually benefit your business? None whatsoever, right? So again, it comes down to this idea of, if you approach this from, with a clear understanding of what you're trying to achieve for your organization or for your customer, and you achieve it, or even if you learn a lesson, whether you've achieved it or not, you now have a much stronger foundation on which to build and to kind of become more systematic in your approach to programs, pilots, and rollouts. And I think that's what we're seeing here, right? And it's easy to say, well, it's Coca-Cola, right? But if you're a small company, it's even more important that you take this kind of approach because you don't have Coke money.
Right. Well, and also understand that Coke doesn't like to lose money, and they have shareholders just like everybody else.
Right, of
I
course.
think that's the big thing that people don't understand with these larger enterprises.
Yeah.
Forgive me for, opining a little bit on this, but when somebody has a bad AI implementation that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars, or maybe, God forbid, millions of dollars inside a large enterprise, they lose their job.
Yeah.
They lose their job. So for them, it's a big deal, That's
Absolutely.
why use cases are built, to prevent that. And for small companies, if you have competitors that are using AI, for you not to build use cases is malpractice in a way. In my mind, like it isn't until when you know that you should be using it strategically, you should stop experimenting. It becomes malpractice. You need to do this so that you can effectively compete, so you can successfully market your organization. And I think that what we can benefit from with these larger viewpoints of these more mature AI organizations is how to do it right without going through the pain that they went through with all the bad AI projects that they had over the past decade, and to go straight to success.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes perfect sense. I feel like we're running on to a point where we should be saying goodbye soon. Any more examples or things you want to share before we jump into the brainer and no brainer?
Let's just do it. I think people get the point.
Yeah.
We're turning into the nagging Jewish mother and Italian father.
Trust me, it's the Italian mother that does the nagging too. All right. So, Geoff, do you want to take the brainer this week?
Yeah, I think, think of your use case as a strategy. It's a project strategy, right? It's not your larger marketing strategy, but a good project has a strategic viewpoint. And like a good project, it should have KPIs and costs associated with it. Don't half-ass it. This is really your opportunity to establish AI leadership, either within your sector, your company, or with your peers in general. So go ahead, do it, and have fun with it, because it's really exciting when these things go right.
Yep, absolutely. So if I would kind of build on that with a no-brainer, experimentation is great up to a point, right? There is value in experimentation and exploration, but ultimately where the rubber hits the road on this is when you really identify those first best use cases, right? And when you do that, don't be driven to your use cases by the examples or the capabilities that a technology partner puts on the table for you. Start with your actual business problem or the outcome you wish to achieve, right? And then, brainstorm them, figure out what are all the things that we can improve in our marketing process? What are all the things that we can improve for our consumer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? How do we innovate? How do we whatever, right? But come down and figure out what are the things that are going to have the most impact for us right now, right? That you need to make that choice strategically. So it's not just building this strategic plan, I guess, which is absolutely 100% something you have to do, but it's making that set of strategic choices that lead you to create the right strategic plan in the first place. And it's incumbent upon you as a marketer to kind of own your destiny in a way, right? Don't
Totally.
don't let the tail wag the dog, to use the analogy you used earlier, right? You've got to be the dog, you're wagging the tail.
Yes, 100%. Those tools work for you. You need to make them work for you. And every marketing organization is unique, right? I mean, we know this, like they all have different approaches to marketing. They all have different viewpoints in their customer base.
Right.
So why wouldn't you make your approach to using these tools somewhat unique?
Right. Exactly. That's a great point too. The idea that, somebody else's best use case isn't necessarily your best use case. And if, you're kind of taking your cues from the market, which we all do to some extent, forget about the vendors for a second. But if you're taking all of your cues from the press, let's say, right, and you're doing the things that you see other brands doing because you feel like that's the way to keep up, that's not the way to get ahead, right? You need, you might have totally different best use cases that would allow your brand to gain strategic advantage when everybody else is kind of doing the same stuff and just kind of maintaining parity.
Right. 100% right. So with that, shall we wrap?
Let's wrap, my friend.
All right, let's keep the good times rolling. Thank you for listening to us for the Marketing Podcast Network, or however you get your favorite podcasts. Subscribe on YouTube and hit the like button to show your support. Subscribe, follow on Spotify, Apple, or your favorite podcast service. And make sure to give us a rating and review. That goes a long way to helping other listeners to discover the pod. And certainly we appreciate it if you share the podcast as well. Last but not least, check us out at nobrainerpodcast.com, where you can also drop an email if you have questions or suggestions for future episodes.